make sure this is the right problem to solve, then jumping to how to solve it.
Do you want to impact the world and still turn a profit? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to Growth Everywhere. This is the show where you'll find real conversations with real entrepreneurs. They'll share everything from their biggest struggle to the exact strategies they use on a daily basis. So if you're ready for a value-packed interview, listen on. Here's your host, Eric Sue.
Before we jump into today's interview, if you guys could leave a review and a rating and also subscribe as well, that would be a huge help to the podcast. So if you actually enjoy the content and you'd like to hear more of it, please support us by leaving us a review and subscribe to the podcast as well. Thanks so much. Okay, everyone. Today we have Aaron Bird, who is the CEO of Bizible, which helps marketing teams measure and plan for revenue. I'm going to be really interested in this one. So Aaron, how's it going?
Great. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for being here. So why don't you first tell us a little bit about kind of who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of Bizible. I started the company in 2011, and we help B2B marketing teams track, optimize, and measure their impact on revenue. So a couple different ways you can think about that. One is, the saying of 50% of my marketing is working. The problem is I just don't know which 50%. We help them solve that problem. And so it's really about marketing teams drive revenue, and Bizible helps you not only prove that, but then also make better decisions based off the data you have.
Got it. Okay. And what was the impetus behind the idea for this company?
Yeah, well, so before I started the company, I was at Microsoft and I was working on their ad platform. So display ads in their owned and operated stuff like MSN, as well as the ads that you see in Bing, right? So paid search. And when I looked at the, all the advertisers that were buying advertising from both Microsoft and as well as like Google and Facebook, there was kind of this thin slice of advertisers that were not trying to sell something online, right? They weren't selling TVs to consumers. They were selling enterprise software to businesses or planes to businesses or things like that. So this B2B world where they were buying media from companies like Microsoft and Google, but the outcome was very different. The call to action online wasn't to buy immediately, but it was to talk to a salesperson or even just engage in marketing content and eventually talk to a salesperson. So in the scheme of things, when you're at Microsoft and you're looking this is a small piece of the pie. It's under 10% of media spend comes from B2B companies. But in reality, it's still a big chunk. And so I knew that the problems that they had around measuring marketing was very different than the kind of core use case or the core customer for most media companies, and being like selling TVs or something like that, like e-commerce. So I knew there was an issue here. I knew that Microsoft and Google and the like were never going to solve it because it was never going to be a big enough piece of their pie, but it was still a very big problem. So that was kind of the early insight, is knowing that they weren't getting what they needed and they weren't going to, and somebody needed to go solve that specific problem.
Great. So, I'm a marketer. I'm interested in measuring and planning for revenue. So can you give a case study of Bizible in action and kind of what the results were?
Yeah. I mean, I think our marketers, our prospects, when they come to us today, the marketing teams are measuring things like leads or, how much kind of engagement they got, things like this, but they're not able to measure it further down the funnel. So the things that actually matter, like how much pipeline did you generate? How much revenue did you generate? And so pretty much every one of our customers has an aha moment after setting up Bizible, where for the first time, the marketing team is thought of as a revenue driver and not a cost center. When you're a CMO and you're reporting to the board and your metrics are, last quarter we generated 50,000 leads. Our cost per lead was $20, right? These aren't things the board cares about. Like, you're not in the business to generate leads. You're in the business to generate revenue. So once you can tie marketing to revenue, and the CMO can show up to the board and say, we generated $50 million in revenue last quarter from the marketing that we did that cost us, $10 million. And if you give me another $10 million, I can go generate another $50 million in revenue. That's the kind of conversation it enables, and that's the kind of behavior change that we get in organizations. So pretty much everyone is measuring something like a lead metric when they come to us, and then they then get insights into revenue. And that's the primary kind of aha moment that our customers have.
Got it. So how do you guys do that exactly? I kind of get it from a high level, what you're saying, you're getting people to focus more on revenue, but instead of you're refocusing them, right? So how does it work? Let's take us, for example, right? We do a lot of content marketing, right? Podcasts like this, for example, a lot of blogs and things like that, a lot of speaking as well. How do we quantify, how our marketing's going based on those activities?
Yeah. So we pull data in from lots of different systems. So the first step in this is you've got to get all of the data. And the unit of kind of data for us is what we call a touch point. It's a person, a prospect, interacting with a brand on behalf of a company. So we focus on B2B. So there's the notion of a business that's the potential buyer, as well as a person that's the potential buyer, on the buying side. So a touch point is kind of our unit of data. And so we want to be able to get all the touch point data across all of the channels that someone's marketing into one place. And that's step one for Bizible. So we integrate with all the major ad platforms. If you scan a badge at a conference, that's a touch point that we pull in. If somebody shows up to a dinner, a field marketing dinner, and again, this is B2B. So our segment that we sell into, our business is selling to businesses. So there's a lot of face-to-face stuff that happens, like field marketing or quote unquote steak dinners or conferences, things like that. So even phone calls, like you call in, right? I go to your website and I call in. So there's all these places where this data lives. In some cases, we have to create the data ourselves because it doesn't exist. In other cases, we pull it in from existing systems. So we have lots of integrations. And so that's step one. Get all the data. We need all the touch points, right? If we don't know when somebody interacted with your brand through marketing, then obviously we can't measure that. So we have to be able to get that. And that's really Bizible's core competency and why we're the market leaders, because we've done a really good job of getting all of the data in one place. And then, there's kind of, if you walk up the stack, then now you have to analyze all that data, right? And draw conclusions about what's working and what's not. And so there's a lot of work that goes into that and some machine learning and stuff like that too.
Okay. I don't want to get too much in the weeds here, but I'm just super curious. So, you've connected everything. What happens afterwards to be able how do you guys make it where people can quantify? Let's say they've done like a badge scan, for example. How do they quantify the revenue generated from that?
Yeah, so I'll try to not get too buzzwordy, but the marketing attribution, that attribution itself is the process of what you just asked. So, and there's different models. So I'll give a simple example. So Bizible, we sell software to businesses. So we are a customer of Bizible as well. We're in our own target audience. And so let's say that, you were looking at buying Bizible, and let's say you ended up purchasing and you spent, $50,000 a year for our software. What we would then do is we would say, okay, let's take all the touch points for that account. So, there's Eric, but maybe there's 5 other people at your company that were involved in buying, right? And in a B2B world, there's a buying committee. It's not just one person. So we take all the people that were involved in buying on the buyer side. We line up all of their touch points, so all their interactions with marketing and sales. And then we take that $50,000 of purchase and we allocate pieces of it back to those touch points. So if you added up the allocation across all the touch points, you'd get $50,000. Let's say for easy math, there were 50 touch points. An easy algorithm is even distribution. So in that world, each of those touch points would get a $1,000 credit of revenue, adding up to $50,000. So in your case, let's say Eric came by our booth and I scanned your badge. And that was one of those touch points. Then that conference, let's say it was Dreamforce that we were at, Dreamforce would get $1,000 worth of revenue credit from that badge scan because you ended up purchasing for $50,000, and we move that across, spread that across those 50 touch points. So that's a very simple example. Obviously, it's much more complicated than that, but that kind of hopefully paints a picture there to understand how it works.
So before we go any further, I just wanted to tell you about a problem that entrepreneurs have been coming to me with. They don't know what they need to do next to grow their business, or they don't have the right resources to execute on marketing needs. Oftentimes, they don't have a marketing strategy, or they don't know who or what to hire for. If this sounds like something that you've been dealing with, I have a solution for you. Single Grain is a growth marketing agency ran by yours truly that has worked with venture-backed startups to Fortune 500 companies to help solve their marketing issues. Our strong points are in SEO and paid advertising, and if you need help in other areas, we're always happy to tap into our network of highly vetted vendors that we can even help manage for you. So there's no need to stress yourself out trying to find the right people for the job because we've got you covered. So if you're interested in this, just go to growtheverywhere.com/help to get more information. Once again, that's growtheverywhere.com/help. So how do you guys go about making money?
Yeah, so it's a SaaS platform. We sell to businesses, so they pay a subscription and they access our data online through either our application or the CRM or data warehouse. There's kind of lots of places, but they're paying a subscription to us for access to the data and the insights and the knowledge that's created from that so they can make better decisions.
Got it. I'm assuming you're probably selling mostly mid-market to enterprise, or?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Our sweet spot starts at a few hundred employees, which is kind of the low end of mid-market for us, on up to the Fortune 100.
Great. Okay. So, I mean, what kind of numbers can you share around the business today? Anything about revenues, numbers, or growth rates, anything like that?
Yeah, sure. I think, we're just about doubling year over year. We were in the Inc. 500 that just was announced. That's public data. We did $3.5 million last year in revenue, and you can find that on the Inc. site. So, and we're just about doubling year over year. So that gives you kind of an idea of where we're at. Yeah, so it's growing nicely. It's still very early. It's a very big market, but we're the leader and excited to be where we're at.
Awesome. So, I mean, in terms of customer acquisition, I'm assuming there has to be, heavy sales, but I mean, is there anything else that you could talk about that's working for you in terms of customer acquisition? Maybe anything unique?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've got a really unusual insight into that because we have hundreds of customers and we help them measure what's working, right? So I know not only what works for us, but it's great because we work with some of the best B2B marketers in the world, and we get to help them measure what's working and do a better job with it. So I think if you're selling B2C is very different. So if you're selling to businesses, which is the world that I know really well, things that work well, LinkedIn ads work really well. On the surface, they can seem expensive because anyone that's ever bought LinkedIn knows that the cost per click or the cost per impression is much higher than like a Facebook or Twitter even. But the targeting capabilities, if you're selling to a business, I can target CMOs at Fortune 100 companies on LinkedIn. That's the only place in the world I can target like that. So because the targeting's so specific, and if you know who your ideal customer is, you can go and get them on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn ads works not only really well for us, but our customers as well. Direct mailers is making a big comeback in B2B. So, sending someone, not like a postcard, but even a box, like we'll send boxes out that have, Seattle chocolates in them and things like this to with an ebook on Attribution 101 or things like that. So we'll take one of our ebooks, we'll print it, bound it into a book, and then ship that to somebody with some chocolates or things like that. So there's PFL.com is a great vendor for that.
Nice.
It's integrated right into our CRM. My outbound team hits a button in Salesforce and it mails a box and it gives them tracking data. So it tells that outbound calling person the day that shows up on that person's desk. And of course, what do? They call them and email them that day. So it's expensive, obviously. I mean, sending boxes isn't cheap, but if you can, and this is all kind of tied into account-based marketing and the ability, if you know what your ideal customer profile is, being able to send them a box, target them on LinkedIn, and get after them, it may seem expensive on the cost for that touch, but if you know they're a good candidate, then it really pays off. So we've seen a lot of folks doing mailers, LinkedIn ads. I think outbound calling still works great. So does sending outbound email. We use Outreach as a software platform that's really critical and great for sending email. So those are some of the things that not only we see ourselves, but also through our customers.
Love it. And let's talk about your sales team because you talked about outreach for a second. So how big is your sales team, A, and then how's it structured, B?
Yep. Let's see. We've been doing a lot of hiring lately. We've got about 60 people in sales. The company's 105, so we've got a lot in sales as a percentage. I've got 16 account executives, so these are folks closing deals. And then we've got about 43 people doing mostly outbound, but a few of those are qualifying inbound leads.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you have like 43-ish people focused, let's call them inbound SDRs. Is that how it works?
So so of the 43, we have 2 inbound SDRs. So they're qualifying inbound leads. And then I have 41 doing outbound.
Got it. Okay. So it's almost like a 3-to-1 ratio from SDR to AE, right?
Yeah. The teams are kind of in flux. We target about a 2 to 2.5, but right now it's a little high. But yes, yeah, it's a if you kind of benchmark it against the industry, it's a pretty high outbound to AE ratio.
Great. Love it. Well, tell us about one big struggle you faced while growing Bizible.
Wow. It really depends on the phase of kind of scaling. I think in the early days, we set out to follow kind of the lean startup methodology. And I think even with that goal in mind, we still just didn't do it well enough. Like we didn't, really think about how do we not write code and how do we go out and make sure that we're solving the right problem before we actually solve it. I think I'm an engineer. My co-founder's an engineer. And so we really we had a very much a let's go build something mentality like engineers tend to. And I think most founders are that way. They want to get out and build. And so anyway, I think we set out with that goal and to be intentional about following the lean startup process, but it still was very hard to actually do it and think about, how do we do an MVP without writing a line of code? How do we really validate the market and validate that this is the right problem to solve without shipping any software? It's just so tempting to start solving a problem. And I think that for me, when I look at and I give advice to entrepreneurs, there's only one reason that startups fail, and that's that they run out of money. That's it. If you quit, then that's a different story. But I think entrepreneurs that are dedicated, if you eventually run out of money and you can't, pay your bills and stuff, then that forces you out. So time is the thing that's against you because of that factor. And I think every entrepreneur jumps out. They're in this business because they want to solve problems. And so as soon as they think they found the right problem, they jump to solving it. And my biggest piece of advice and a hard learned lesson myself is really make sure it's the right problem. And really in hindsight, we spent 2 years finding the right problem, and we could have done that faster if we would have even pushed ourselves more to not write code to figure it out.
So what I'm hearing is hire the right people and get things off your plate faster.
Yeah, I think that helps. I think just make sure this is the right problem to solve, then jumping to how to solve it.
Great. Okay. Well, I always like to talk about good habits. So, and I guess this probably plays into your day as well. So how do you structure your day in general? What happens in the morning?
The only structure I have is I block off some time at the end of the day just to make sure I get through kind of email and tasks and stuff like that. So I block an hour and a half off. Doesn't always get to stay there. Sometimes it gets overridden, but I try to be intentional at the end of the day to get through email and stuff like that. Other than that, I don't have kind of a cadence. My calendar gets full pretty quick, and whether it's meeting with customers or prospects or selling people and recruiting and or internal meetings. So I don't think there's kind of a fixed schedule, but I try to make time at the end of the day to make sure I've gotten to all the really important stuff and responded to emails and things like that.
Great. Well, you're an engineer, so I want to ask you, what's one new tool that you've added in the last year that's added a lot of value? So it could be like Headspace or Evernote. Yeah,
I think we added Slack at the company, and I think that's been really helpful. That's probably it. It's not a personal thing, but it's definitely helped communication and let people, kind of focus on channels and stuff like that.
Great. And what's one must-read book you'd recommend to everyone?
Yeah, I think, there's lots of great books out there for business. And I think I'll give you one that I think it's in my top 3 and it's lesser known. So, lots of people probably give you Good to Great and lots of this other stuff. But Fifth Discipline it's an organizational behavior book that I read in business school. So it's about culture and how do you build culture, and what are some of the pitfalls that as you build culture, the impacts that has on the organization as a system itself. And the Fifth Discipline is systems thinking is kind of what they're talking about there. And so I think that's shaped me more than any other book, and it's one that I see cited really infrequently.
Wow. Well, I just ordered two copies. Thank you.
Great.
Okay. And then, kind of building on the whole learning aspect as well. Do you listen to any podcasts or any blogs that you tune into on a daily basis or weekly basis?
For me, so we're in Seattle. I read GeekWire or I scan it just to, I do a lot of recruiting. And so I stay tuned into the Pacific Northwest kind of tech scene because that's where we're going to get most of our people. So I go to GeekWire a lot. Tech Meme, I go to get kind of the headlines. And then I think New York Times is where I get the kind kind of the more global stuff and culture and stuff like that.
Awesome. Well, Aaron, this has been great. What's the best way for people to find you online?
Yeah, go to bizible.com. It's bizible.com. Or, you can email me, Aaron@Bizible, if you have any questions or anything I can help out with.
Sounds good. Aaron, thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Growth Everywhere. If you loved what you heard, be sure to head back to growtheverywhere.com for today's show notes and a ton of additional resources. But before you go, hit the subscribe button to avoid missing out on next week's value-packed interview. Enjoy the rest of your week, and remember to take action and continue growing.